Hey everyone, my name is Lance, and this is Amped About AimPad. It's been several months since my last update, and wanted to give you an idea of what we've been up to. So the most important thing that's happened recently was the Master ControlPad was finally released to Kickstarter backers, and they now have it in their hands, and they've been giving very useful feedback and ideas and concepts of ways to improve the product. There has been several software updates, several firmware updates that have dramatically improved its reliability and performance, and it's now at a state that I felt confident that it was going to be useful to start collecting some data on how it compares to other products. So my last video I highlighted a Razer product that has analog keys similar to this, but this is the Cooler Master one, and I wanted to see how they compared. Now, for full disclosure, I helped develop the analog technology in this product, so inherently I'm going to be a little bit biased. And so I thought it would be useful and important to highlight some changes in my methodology of how I'm collecting analog data and how I can try to eliminate some of that bias so that the data that we're getting isn't kind of tainted or skewed in one way, that I can show that the data that I collected can be reliably collected by other people and get similar results. So let's jump into that. Alright, so my initial methodology was very manual. I would essentially take this digital height gauge and use this knob to lower it and raise it to the exact point where it would come in contact with a switch that I wanted to measure, and I would visually see as it comes down at the point where it touches, and that is the point where I would zero out the measurement and then start taking measurements every 0.2 millimeters. And this worked pretty well, but I was kind of concerned that because I was relying on me visually seeing when it would come in contact, there was going to be some inconsistencies there. So I needed to find a way to reliably and consistently say that point is the very top of that specific key, because there's going to be some variance across different switches and things like that, and I wanted to make sure that I accurately recorded the point where this sensor starts to come in contact with the key switch. So to do that, I decided I would try to use this pressure sensor, and I would mount that here to see exactly when the pressure would start to increase, and I would say reliably, well, that's when it started to come into contact with the switch. Unfortunately, the pressure that was necessary for this to register was much higher than what was actually being applied here, so I wasn't able to actually use that sensor effectively. So I decided to come up with another one that is a capacitive touch sensor. And essentially what this relies on is when a human touches this metal contact, it will change the capacitance and will increase or decrease a low or high value on that pin. And you can see whenever I touch this, it has an LED display that I set up so that it can indicate whether it's low or high. So as soon as I barely touch it, it turns it red, and when it's not touched, it's green. So that was basically go, 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 and then when I hit the bottom, stop. That's the point where it comes in contact. So what I did was I rigged up this 3D printed mechanism and essentially converted this sensor into a touch-sensitive keycap. And what that does is that means I can line this up, and when I push it over to that point here, right now it's green, so it's not in contact, but as soon as I get in touch with it, it turns it from green to red. And I know that that point, and I can actually fine-tune the point with this little knob up here that very, very slightly adjusts the amount of height. As soon as it turns red, I know that that is the exact moment when it comes in contact with that switch, so I can reliably and consistently say whenever that turns red, I'm going to zero it out, and I'll do that across all the switches, and that will tell me reliably that I am taking a measurement at the correct point. So the second most important change in my methodology was making an enhancement to our AimPad Xbox controller test software. You can download this from aimpad.com/downloads. But basically what this does is it visually gives you a representation of what an Xbox controller, or in this case a ControlPad, is doing from a game's perspective. And I have this option to capture different amounts of samples. So what I'm doing for my testing purposes, I set this sample to 1, because all I want to do is just capture a single moment in time of what the values are coming from that analog switch. So how I had this set up was basically have a check mark for this append log, set the samples to capture at 1, I would zero out the digital height gauge with the previous step that I showed you, and then click the capture button, and that is the 0 point. Then what I would do is I would move the digital height gauge down 0.2 millimeters and take another capture point, and then continue that process on. I would Move it down 0.4 millimeters, capture 0.6 millimeters, capture 0.8 millimeters, capture, so on throughout the whole entire key press all the way down to 4 millimeters. So I'd have an accurate representation of the values that are coming out of the analog switch at every 0.2 millimeters. So what does this look like with the control pad? So I took several samples of different switches across the control pad, and this is what the results of that test look. So you can see the values of all of these switches are very tightly packed together, and that's a good sign that I'm getting good consistent analog data, and it's predictable and reliable, which is really, really important for analog switches. You can see that in most cases it's between 0.2 millimeters and 0.6 millimeters when we're getting some type of analog signal, which is very good because you want that to be as small as possible for the best reliable performance and experience. And you can see that all the way through that key press, as I'm pushing it down, there's a unique value for every time that I'm taking a measurement, and all the way to about 3.8 millimeters and sometimes 4 millimeters, I'm getting an analog value all the way through that key press. Now to compare that to like the Razer product that I looked at last time, the values are not tightly together, so they're inconsistent from one switch to the other. And the values aren't all the way through the entire key press. You can see in most cases they bottom out between 1.4 millimeters and sometimes 0.2 or somewhere around there. But the vast majority are halfway through that key press. There's no value changes whatsoever. So it's not good analog control there. So what I then wanted to also show you is for the reference samples that we use for AimPad. This is what the data looks like. This is an uncorrected value, which looks very similar to the control pad. It's basically identical, so that's good. We have some algorithms that have not been implemented yet on the control pad that basically converts it into a much more linear state, and that will give you this perfectly straight line, and it's very, very consistent and very reliable. And you couldn't do that unless the values were very reliable from switch to switch. It's hard for that algorithm to work unless these values are consistent. So long story short, the values coming out of the control pad are very good, and I'm impressed to the point that it's at a point where I think that this is an effective demonstration of what's possible with AimPad technology. So with that being said, I wanted to show off some other ideas and some weird things that I wanted to play around with the control pad that I've been thinking about, and I wanted to see if they were effective or not. So my first experiment that I had in mind was to see if I could take the control pad and convert it into an Xbox controller, because it actually functions as an Xbox controller, but it doesn't have any thumbsticks or triggers or things like that. I wanted to see if I could actually make a joystick viable on control pad. So I had looked online for different designs of things that you could stick on a keyboard and things like that. I wasn't too happy with it, so I decided to design my own. So the way that this is set up is that right in the middle is this cross point for like a keycap that you would have on a Cherry keyboard. Because we're using Cherry switches, it makes sense for this center mount to be mounted right there in the middle. So if I place that kind of right there, that acts as the kind of leverage point. So I can push that down and then have left and right control, and you can see in the bottom right hand controller, I have full analog control over that stick, which is pretty cool. It's different and unique and interesting, but I wanted to see if it was actually viable in a game that had analog movement, and if it made sense to use it this way. So this is a game called Life Goes On, and the premise of this game is it's a somewhat traditional platformer that actually has pretty good analog movement. You can see I can move slowly here and move faster and have a full run speed. But the concept that's kind of the interesting thing about this game is that it actually requires you to die, because there's no way for me to effectively get up to that cliff up there because I need to apply some weight over here. So what the game does is it allows you to kill yourself and use your dead body as dead weight, and allows you to move through the rest of this level. So what that continues to repeat, in a common theme in this game is dying a lot. But right now, as far as using it as a joystick, it's not too bad. It's I don't know, it's pretty decent. It feels a little weird. but I do have good control. Let me see if I can move this around real quick to get what I need. All right, yeah. And then so far pretty good. Again, I have pretty good analog control. If I want to move fast or slow, I can. I would say it's viable. It's workable. It's weird again, but if you really want to have analog control with an analog stick, I think it's viable. So I'll in the description below, I'll add a link to this STL file if you want to 3D print your own control pad version of this. But I think this experiment was a success. So using the control pad as a gamepad had me thinking, what if I were to use it as like an arcade stick? Would it be viable to use this as an arcade stick to be used like in fighting games or something like that? So I grew up in the 80s and 90s playing lots and lots of Street Fighter 2 in the arcade, and I loved the game, but I wanted to see, could I use the control pad as a Street Fighter 2 fight stick? So I have Street Fighter 5 here loaded up, ready to play, and the way I've mapped this is I have this left stick kind of mapped to be the D-pad, so I can get distinct directions for throwing fireballs and things like that. I have this top row is for the punch buttons, and this bottom row for the kick buttons with light, medium, and strong attacks, as a traditional Street Fighter 2 setup is laid out. So I just wanted to see, is it viable to use this control pad as a fight stick? So let's see if it works. So I am able to execute commands pretty decently. Oh, except when it comes off. That would be an issue. So, yeah, my impression is probably not the greatest way to play Street Fighter 2 or Street Fighter 5. I think that it has some issues. One is that it's not super heavy. It does have some weight to it, but maybe if I threw some like non-stick pads on the bottom or some way to secure it so it's not moving around a lot. The other issue is that this came off pretty easily. I guess it's kind of frantic using this for fight sticks because you get kind of crazy with some of your moves and things like that. With it coming off in the middle of the game, probably not super viable. Even though I wanted it to work, I think my impression is probably not the best way to use control pad. So there's a rumor that real Yakuza use a gamepad. And I'm here to tell you that that's not necessarily true. I'm going to use control pad to have good analog movement with my left hand, and I'm going to have good camera control and fighting styles with my right hand on the mouse. And I think this is probably one of the best ways to play this game. As you can see, based off of how I push the key down, is how fast I will move. So Yakuza 0 has fantastic analog movement. I can control the speed and direction of this character as well as the mouse to control the camera at the same time. So it's an effective way to use this game using control pad because it has analog movement that's fantastic as well as good mouse control. So what I'm going to do here is interrupt these guys that are up to no good and give them the beatdown of their life. And I'll use it doing control pad. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed that video and got some ideas of ways that you can leverage the control pad to effectively enhance your gaming experience. I have some other ideas of additional videos that I want to give you ways that you can do some funny things with the ControlPad. So if you are interested in this type of content and want to see more, go ahead and subscribe. Otherwise, thank you for watching.